The transport shuttle Meridian's Hope descended through the thick atmosphere of 442B, its hull glowing from the heat of atmospheric entry. Inside the passenger compartment, 18-year-old Sarah pressed her face against the small viewport, watching alien clouds swirl past in shades of purple and gold. Her mother, Doctor, sat beside her reviewing data tablets with the focused intensity that had made her one of Earth's leading. "First time seeing an alien world, sweetheart?" asked without looking up from her research. "First time leaving Earth," Sarah replied, her voice filled with wonder. "I still can't believe you convinced the colonial administration to let me come with you." Finally looked up, her expression softening. "You're 18 now, and this research expedition could last 3 years. I wasn't about to miss that much of your life." The shuttle shuddered as it broke through the final cloud layer, revealing the sprawling settlement of New Geneva below. What had started as a small research outpost 15 years ago had grown into humanity's first major colony on an alien world. Gleaming dome structures dotted the landscape like metallic mushrooms, connected by covered walkways that protected colonists from the planet's intense ultraviolet radiation. "Attention passengers," came the pilot's voice over the intercom. "We'll be landing at New Geneva Spaceport in approximately 10 minutes. Please secure all personal items and prepare for final approach." Sarah's stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She'd spent her entire life on Earth, dreaming of the day she might visit the colonies she'd read about in news feeds and documentary programs. Now, as the shuttle's landing thrusters fired and they settled onto the tarmac with a gentle bump, that dream was becoming reality. The airlock cycled open with a hiss, and Sarah got her first breath of 442B's atmosphere. It smelled different than Earth air, cleaner somehow, with a faint metallic tang that reminded her of ozone after a thunderstorm. The gravity felt lighter too, making each step feel like a small bounce. Doctor, a tall man with graying hair and a warm smile, approached them across the landing pad. "Welcome to New Geneva. I'm Director. It's an honor to have someone of your reputation join our research team." Shook his hand warmly. "Thank you, Director. This is my daughter, Sarah. I hope it's still acceptable that she's accompanying me." "Of course, we have excellent educational facilities here, and I'm sure she'll find plenty to keep her occupied while you're working." Director's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Fair warning, though, eligible young women are somewhat rare out here. You might want to prepare for some attention." Sarah blushed, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the main terminal building. A group of colonists had gathered around someone Sarah couldn't see, their voices rising in what sounded like an argument. "What's going on over there?" asked, her maternal instincts immediately on alert. Director sighed. "That would be the Vanguard delegation. They arrived yesterday for the quarterly trade negotiations." "Vanguard?" Sarah asked. "One of the more traditional human colonies," explained diplomatically. "They settled on B about 20 years ago. Very different philosophy from ours regarding colonial development and social structure." As they watched, the crowd parted, revealing a young man roughly Sarah's age arguing heatedly with what appeared to be several older colonists. He was tall and lean, with sun-bleached hair and the kind of deep tan that came from working under an alien sun. Despite the heated discussion, his posture remained calm and controlled. "The trade agreements are fair," the young man was saying, his voice carrying clearly across the landing pad. "We're offering rare earth minerals at below-market rates in exchange for medical supplies and manufacturing equipment. If New Geneva doesn't want to trade, there are other colonies that will." "It's not about the trade terms," one of the older colonists shot back. "It's about your people's practices, the stories we hear about how Vanguard Colony operates." "Stories," the young man interrupted. "Rumors and hearsay from people who never set foot on our world." Director muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. "Excuse me, ladies, I should probably intervene before this gets out of hand." But Sarah was already walking toward the group, drawn by curiosity and something else she couldn't quite name. The young man's eyes met hers across the crowd, and she felt an odd little skip in her heartbeat. "Sarah," called after her, but Sarah was already pushing through the crowd. "What's the problem here?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her boldness. The young man's expression shifted as he looked at her, his earlier tension melting into something like wonder. You're new here." "Just arrived," Sarah confirmed. "Sarah." He replied, then seemed to catch himself staring. I mean, I'm from Vanguard Colony. The older colonist who'd been arguing snorted. Great, now we're dragging newcomers into this. Into what? Sarah asked, looking back and forth between them. Hesitated, then squared his shoulders. These people seem to think that because Vanguard Colony maintains certain traditional values, we're somehow backward or oppressive. Traditional values, Sarah raised an eyebrow. We believe in strong family units, clear social roles, and personal responsibility, explained. Men provide for and protect their families. Women manage households and raise children. Everyone has a purpose, everyone contributes. One of the New Geneva colonists laughed bitterly. You mean women aren't allowed to work outside the home? Marriages are arranged by family elders, and anyone who doesn't conform gets ostracized. His jaw tightened. That's a gross oversimplification. Is it true? Sarah interrupted, looking directly at. For a moment he seemed to struggle with how to answer. It's complicated. Our society works differently than yours, but it works. We have the lowest crime rate, highest productivity, and strongest community bonds of any human colony. At what cost? His voice came from behind Sarah. She'd finally caught up, and her expression was carefully neutral in that way that meant she was angry but trying not to show it. Turned to face, and his expression shifted again, this time to something approaching awe. You must be Sarah's mother. Doctor replied coolly, and you are. My father is Governor James of Vanguard Colony. Seemed to straighten as he spoke, as if invoking his father's name gave him confidence. Doctor, I've heard of your work in xenobiology. Your research papers on symbiotic ecosystems are brilliant. His expression softened slightly at the professional recognition. Thank you. I understand you're here for trade negotiations. Among other things, replied, his eyes drifting back to Sarah. Though I'm beginning to think this trip may be more productive than I initially hoped. Sarah felt that odd little skip in her heartbeat again. There was something about the way he looked at her. Intense, focused, like she was the only person in the universe. It was flattering and unsettling at the same time. Director finally reached them, slightly out of breath. I see you've met our Vanguard delegation. I thought we agreed to keep the philosophical debates to a minimum during your visit. Of course, Director, replied formally. I apologize if we've caused a disturbance. No disturbance, said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Why don't we get everyone settled in their accommodations, and we can discuss trade matters in the morning? As the crowd began to disperse, caught Sarah's arm gently. Sarah, would you like to have dinner tonight? I'd love to show you around New Geneva. Sarah glanced at her mother, who was watching the exchange with obvious concern. I'm not sure that's. Actually, continued, his voice taking on a formal quality that seemed oddly ceremonial, I should speak with your mother first. Doctor, might I have a private word with you? His eyebrows rose. Certainly. Drew aside while Sarah watched nervously. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see his expression growing increasingly incredulous as spoke. Finally, said something sharp enough that several nearby colonists turned to look. Absolutely not, his voice carried clearly across the landing pad. The answer is no. Shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded respectfully. I understand your position, Doctor, but perhaps you'll allow me to explain our customs. I understand your customs perfectly well, interrupted, and they have no place in my daughter's life. Sarah hurried over to them, worry gnawing at her stomach. What's wrong? What's going on? Took a deep breath, visibly composing herself. Mister was just making a suggestion about your future that I find completely inappropriate. What kind of suggestion? And looked at each other, and Sarah could see some kind of silent battle of wills taking place between them. Finally spoke, I asked your mother for permission to court you with the intention of marriage. Sarah's mouth fell open. You what? I know it seems sudden, said quickly. But on Vanguard Colony, when a man meets a woman he wishes to marry, he approaches her family to request permission to court her formally. It's considered the proper way to show respect for both the woman and her family. You want to marry me? Sarah's voice came out as a squeak. We just met 5 minutes ago. I know it sounds crazy, said, his formal demeanor cracking to reveal genuine nervousness underneath. But from the moment I saw you, I knew. You're intelligent, beautiful, and strong enough to leave you for adventure. Those are rare qualities anywhere in human space. "This is insane," muttered. "Sarah, we're leaving now." But Sarah found herself rooted to the spot, staring at. Part of her was horrified by the presumption of his proposal. But another part, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, was flattered by his certainty, his immediate and complete focus on her. "I'm not asking you to decide today," said earnestly. "I'm asking for the chance to court you properly, to show you who I am and what kind of life I could offer you." "What kind of life?" Sarah asked, despite warning hand on her arm. "A life of purpose and meaning," replied. "A chance to build something lasting together. On Vanguard Colony, marriage isn't just about two people. It's about creating the foundation for future generations. Every family is vital to the colony's survival and growth." "And what would be expected of me in this marriage?" Sarah asked. Hesitated. "You would be my partner in every sense. You would manage our household, raise our children, and help me make decisions about our family's future. In return, I would provide for you, protect you, and honor you as the heart of our family." "Manage the household," repeated flatly. "Raise children, what about her education, her career aspirations, her own dreams and goals?" "Those would be adjusted to fit within the family structure," admitted. "But Sarah would be respected and valued. Vanguard Colony wives are the most honored members of our society." "Honored prisoners," shot back. "It's not imprisonment when it's chosen freely," protested. "And I would never force Sarah to do anything against her will." "Except give up her independence," said. Sarah looked back and forth between them, her head spinning. Part of her was appalled by what was suggesting. The idea of giving up her plans to study, of becoming a traditional housewife on an alien world, went against everything she'd been raised to believe about gender equality and personal freedom. But another part of her was intrigued by the intensity of certainty, by the idea of being so valued and cherished by someone. She'd never had a serious relationship on Earth, had always felt like she was waiting for something she couldn't name. And now here was, offering her a completely different life, a chance to be essential rather than just another student in a crowded universe. "I need time to think," Sarah said finally. Sarah began. "Just time to think," Sarah repeated firmly. "Mister, thank you for your proposal, but this is a very big decision and I'm not going to make it lightly." Nodded respectfully. "Of course, take all the time you need. I'll be here for 3 more days before returning to Vanguard Colony." As they walked away toward the colony's guest quarters, kept shooting worried glances at her daughter. "Sarah, you can't possibly be considering this seriously." "I don't know what I'm considering," Sarah admitted. "But you always taught me to keep an open mind about different cultures and ways of life." "Different cultures, yes. Giving up your future for some stranger's idea of traditional values. That's not cultural appreciation, sweetheart, that's—" "What?" Sarah interrupted. "What is it, Mom?" Was quiet for a long moment. "I'm scared you're going to throw away everything you've worked for because some handsome young man made you feel special." Sarah considered this as they reached their assigned quarters, a comfortable 2-bedroom unit in one of the residential domes. "Would it be so terrible if I chose a different path than the one we planned?" "Not if it was truly your choice," said softly. "But how can you make an informed decision about a way of life you've never experienced, about a person you've just met?" It was a fair question, and Sarah didn't have a good answer for it. But as she unpacked her belongings in the small bedroom that would be hers for the next few months, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. That evening, Sarah stood at the window of their quarters, looking out at the alien landscape of 442B. In the distance, she could see the lights of the spaceport where ship waited to take him back to Vanguard Colony. She had 3 days to decide whether she wanted to know more about the life he was offering her. 3 days to decide whether she was brave enough to consider a future she'd never imagined. 3 days to figure out if was offering her a dream or a beautiful cage. Joined her at the window, setting a cup of tea in Sarah's hands. "Whatever you decide," she said quietly, "I'll support you. But please just promise me you'll think carefully about what you'd be giving up." Sarah sipped her tea and watched the alien stars emerge in the purple twilight sky. "I promise, Mom, but I also need to think about what I might be gaining." As night fell over New Geneva, Sarah found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring, and whether she had the courage to find out. The next morning arrived with 442B's brilliant sunrise painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Sarah woke early, her sleep having been restless and filled with strange dreams of alien worlds and uncertain futures. She found already awake in the small kitchen area, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing research data on her tablet. "Sleep well?" asked, though her concerned expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Not really," Sarah admitted, pouring herself coffee from the thermal carafe. "I kept thinking about what said yesterday." Set down her tablet. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That I need to know more before I can make any kind of decision," Sarah replied. "About Vanguard Colony, about their way of life, about himself." "Sarah, I know what you're going to say, Mom, but I can't just dismiss this without understanding it first. That wouldn't be fair to anyone involved." A soft chime from the door interrupted them, checked the security monitor and sighed. "Speak of the devil." Stood in the corridor outside their quarters, dressed in clean clothes and carrying what appeared to be a small bouquet of local flowers. Delicate, crystalline blooms that seemed to capture and refract the corridor's lighting in beautiful patterns. Sarah opened the door, nodding that looked as nervous as she felt. "Good morning." "Good morning, Sarah," Doctor nodded respectfully to before offering the flowers to Sarah. "These are native to 442b. They're called light catchers because of how they store and release photons. I thought you might like them." Sarah accepted the flowers, surprised by their weight. They felt almost metallic, but with an organic warmth. "They're beautiful, thank you." "I was wondering," continued, "if you might like to see more of New Geneva today. There's a cultural exchange center where you can learn about all the different human colonies, including Vanguard. It might help you understand our way of life better." Stepped forward. "Mister, I appreciate your courtesy, but I'm not comfortable with my daughter spending time alone with someone she's just met." "Of course," replied immediately. "Doctor, you're more than welcome to join us. In fact, I'd prefer it. This isn't about secrecy or manipulation. I want both of you to understand who I am and what Vanguard Colony represents." Sarah looked at her mother hopefully. "Please, Mom, you always said the best way to understand something is to study it directly." Hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but we're doing this my way. I want to speak with other colonists who visited Vanguard. I want to see data about their society, their economy, their social structures, not just propaganda." "Agreed," said without hesitation. "I have nothing to hide." An hour later, the three of them walked through New Geneva's main commercial district. The colony was bustling with activity, people from dozens of different worlds and cultural backgrounds working together in an environment that felt cosmopolitan and progressive. Sarah noticed that men and women worked side by side in every field she could see, from construction crews to scientific research teams. "This must be very different from Vanguard Colony," observed as they passed a construction site where a female engineer was directing the installation of atmospheric processors. "It is," acknowledged, "but different doesn't necessarily mean better or worse, just different." They reached the Cultural Exchange Center, a large dome filled with interactive displays about human colonies throughout the galaxy. Led them to the Vanguard Colony section, which featured detailed holographic displays of daily life on B. Sarah watched, fascinated, as the displays showed scenes of family life, agriculture, and community gatherings. The people in the projections looked healthy and happy, but she noticed that the gender roles were clearly defined. Men working in fields, factories, and governance, women managing homes, schools, and community services. "It looks peaceful," Sarah said carefully. "It is," replied. "We have virtually no crime, no unemployment, no homelessness. Everyone has a purpose, everyone belongs somewhere." "And if someone doesn't fit into their assigned role?" asked pointedly. Was quiet for a moment. "There are accommodations made for special circumstances. People with unique talents or needs are found appropriate positions within the social structure." "That's not really an answer," Sarah said. Sighed. "You're right. The truth is, our system works well for most people, but not for everyone. Those who can't or won't adapt to our cultural norms often choose to emigrate to other colonies. We don't force anyone to stay." "But you also don't change the system to accommodate different viewpoints," pointed out. "No," admitted. "We believe that some principles are worth preserving, even if they're not universal. Social stability and strong family units have served humanity well for thousands of years. We're not willing to abandon them for the sake of individual preferences." Sarah studied the holographic displays more carefully, paying attention to details she'd missed before. The children in the projections looked well cared for and educated, but she noticed that boys and girls seemed to be learning different subjects. The adults appeared content, but there was something about their expressions, a kind of resigned satisfaction rather than genuine joy. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah said to. "Of course." "Why do you believe so strongly in this system? You're young, educated, obviously intelligent. Haven't you ever wondered what life might be like in a more flexible society?" Was quiet for a long time, staring at the holographic displays as if seeing them for the first time. "My parents had the strongest marriage I've ever seen," he said finally. "My father worked 18-hour days to build our family's farm from nothing. My mother managed our household, raised 6 children, and still found time to teach at the community school. They complemented each other perfectly, and they were genuinely happy together." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said. "But couldn't they have been just as happy if your mother had chosen to be a farmer and your father had chosen to teach?" "Maybe," admitted, "but why risk it? Why experiment with something that already works?" "Because people should be free to choose their own paths," interjected. "Because talent and passion don't follow gender lines. And because sometimes the old ways need to evolve," Sarah added, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Looked at her with something that might have been surprise or respect. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more agreeable, more willing to accept guidance." Sarah felt a spark of irritation. Guidance or control? "There's a difference between the two," said defensively. "Is there, in your society, would I be free to disagree with my husband's decisions? To pursue my own interests if they conflicted with his plans? To leave if I became unhappy?" Hesitated just long enough for Sarah to know the answer before he spoke. "Marriage is a commitment. Both partners make sacrifices for the good of the family." "Both partners, or mainly one?" Before could answer, a commotion erupted near the center's entrance. A group of colonists was arguing loudly with someone Sarah couldn't see through the crowd. "Not again," muttered. "What's happening?" asked. "Probably another protest against our trade delegation," replied grimly. "Some people here seem to think that doing business with Vanguard Colony somehow validates our social system." They moved closer to see what was happening. In the center of the crowd, a middle-aged woman with short gray hair was holding what appeared to be a data pad and speaking passionately to anyone who would listen. "I lived on Vanguard Colony for 3 years," the woman was saying. "I know what their traditional values really mean for women. No property rights, no political representation, no freedom to choose your own career or even your own husband. It's not traditional, it's oppressive." His jaw tightened. He said quietly, "She emigrated from Vanguard 5 years ago." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because she couldn't accept the role she was given," replied. But there was something in his voice that suggested the story was more complicated than that. Sarah pushed through the crowd until she could see clearly. The woman noticed her approach and smiled grimly. "You must be the girl is trying to court. I heard about his proposal." "Word travels fast," Sarah said. "Small colony, smaller when there's scandal involved." His expression softened. "You seem like a bright young woman. Let me give you some advice. Don't let that boy's pretty words fool you. I know what life is really like for women on Vanguard Colony." "Tell me," Sarah said simply. Glanced past Sarah to where stood with, his expression carefully neutral. "Not here. Too many ears. But if you really want to know what you'd be getting into, meet me at the Colony Gardens tonight after sunset. I'll tell you everything." Before Sarah could respond, melted back into the crowd, leaving Sarah standing alone with more questions than answers. That evening, Sarah found herself walking through the Colony Gardens as 442B's twin moons rose in the purple sky. The gardens were beautiful, a careful blend of earth plants and native flora that created an otherworldly but somehow comforting landscape. Was waiting by a fountain near the center of the gardens, sitting on a stone bench beneath the spreading branches of what looked like a weeping willow crossed with a fern. "I wasn't sure you'd come," said as Sarah approached. "I need to know the truth," Sarah replied, settling onto the bench beside her. "The truth," repeated with a bitter laugh. "The truth is that is probably a decent young man who genuinely believes he's offering you a good life. The truth is that Vanguard Colony isn't evil, it's just limiting in ways you can't imagine until you've experienced them. What do you mean? Was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I was born on Vanguard Colony, married at 19 to a man chosen by my father and his family. It wasn't a bad marriage, understand. Thomas was kind, respectful, but it wasn't my choice. Did you ever love him? Sarah asked softly. I learned to love him, said. That's how it works there. You make the best of the situation you're given, and eventually you convince yourself that it's what you wanted all along. But you left. I left because my daughter started asking questions I couldn't answer. She wanted to know why she couldn't study engineering like the boys, why she had to learn domestic skills instead of science, why her future husband would be chosen for her instead of letting her choose for herself. His voice grew heavy. And I realized I didn't have good answers. I only had traditions that no longer made sense to me. Sarah stared at the fountain, watching alien fish swim in the illuminated water. What happened when you left? My husband kept our children, said quietly. Colony law, children belong with the father. I haven't seen them in 5 years. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. They took your children. I chose to leave them, corrected. I could have stayed for their sake. Many women do, but I couldn't teach my daughter to accept limitations I was no longer willing to accept myself. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the fountain and the soft sound of alien insects in the garden plants. Do you regret leaving? Sarah asked finally. Every day, said, but I don't regret giving my daughter the knowledge that there are other ways to live. Someday, when she's old enough, she might choose to leave too, and if she does, I'll be here waiting for her. What about specifically? Do you know him? Smiled sadly. I knew him as a boy. He was always thoughtful, always questioning things, which worried his family considerably. He's governor's youngest son, you know. There's a lot of pressure on him to be a model citizen. Is that why he wants to marry me? To prove something to his family? Maybe, or maybe he genuinely believes he can give you a happy life within their system. Looked at Sarah directly. The question is, what do you believe you deserve? Sarah walked back to her quarters slowly, her mind churning with everything had told her. She found waiting in the common area, reading but clearly distracted. How did your walk go? Asked carefully. Enlightening, Sarah replied. She told her mother about the conversation with Watching's expression grow increasingly troubled. Sarah said when she finished, you can't seriously be considering this anymore. I don't know what I'm considering, Sarah admitted. Seems genuine. He's offering me something I've never experienced, the certainty of being essential to someone's happiness. But story. Story is what happens to women who don't fit the mold, said firmly. And you've never fit anyone's mold, sweetheart. You're too independent, too curious, too strong-willed. Maybe that's what likes about me. Maybe, but it's also what his society would try to change about you. Sarah curled up in the chair across from her mother, feeling younger than her 18 years. What should I do, Mom? Was quiet for a long time. I think, she said finally, that you should spend tomorrow getting to know better, not as a potential husband, but as a person. Ask him the hard questions. See how he reacts when you challenge his beliefs. Find out if he's capable of seeing you as an equal partner or if he's just looking for a beautiful ornament for his predetermined life. And if he fails the test, then you'll have your answer. Sarah nodded, but part of her wondered if she was strong enough to walk away from the intensity of certainty, from the allure of being so completely wanted by someone. She'd spent her whole life feeling like she was searching for something she couldn't name. What if was offering her exactly what she'd been looking for, even if it came in a package she'd never expected? As she lay in bed that night, Sarah stared at the light catcher flowers had given her. They glowed softly in the darkness, releasing the stored photons they'd captured during the day. Beautiful, she thought, but only when they were doing exactly what they were designed to do. The question was she a light catcher meant to store and reflect the light of others? Or was she something else entirely, a source of light that needed freedom to burn bright? Tomorrow, she would find out which one wanted her to be. Sarah woke the next morning with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since arriving on 442B. Today would be her last day on New Geneva before returning to Vanguard Colony, which meant it was her last chance to really understand what he was offering her, and what it would cost. She found him waiting in the colony's central plaza, sitting on a bench beneath one of the enormous atmospheric processors that kept New Geneva's air breathable. He looked contemplative, almost melancholy, as he watched the morning bustle of colonists heading to work. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said as she approached. Looked up and smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just thinking about home, and wondering if I've made a terrible mistake in asking you to consider leaving all this behind." Sarah settled beside him on the bench, having second thoughts about your proposal. "No," said immediately, "but having serious thoughts about what I'm asking of you, found me earlier this morning." Sarah's eyebrows rose. She did. "She told me about your conversation last night. She also told me exactly what she thought of my proposal in terms that would make a dock worker blush." His expression was rueful. "She wasn't wrong about everything." "What do you mean?" Was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children play in the plaza's fountain. Boys and girls together, Sarah noticed, laughing and splashing without any apparent concern for gender roles or social expectations. "I've been thinking about what you asked me yesterday," said, "about whether people should be free to choose their own paths, and the truth is, I've always believed they should, in theory. But I've also always believed that most people make better choices when they have guidance and structure." "And what changed your mind?" "You did," turned to look at her directly. "You're not most people, Sarah. You're extraordinary, and asking someone extraordinary to live an ordinary life it's wasteful, maybe even cruel." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, surprise, relief, and something that might have been disappointment all mixed together. "So you're withdrawing your proposal?" "No," said, surprising her. "I'm modifying it." Before Sarah could respond, stood and extended his hand to her. "Walk with me. There's something I want to show you." They walked through New Geneva's residential district, past the neat dome houses and vertical gardens that made the colony feel like a small city rather than a frontier outpost. Led her to a section she hadn't seen before, a cluster of smaller buildings that looked more like workshops than homes. "What is this place?" Sarah asked. "The Innovation District," replied, "where New Geneva's inventors and researchers work on experimental projects. I've been spending time here since we arrived, talking to the engineers and scientists." He led her into one of the buildings, where a woman with grease-stained hands and an infectious grin was working on what looked like a new type of atmospheric processor. "Dr. Martinez called. I'd like you to meet Sarah." Dr. Martinez looked up from her work and smiled. "Ah, the famous Sarah has been talking about you nonstop. I'm Martinez, Chief Engineer for Atmospheric Systems." "Dr. Martinez has been telling me about the work they're doing here," said, "developing new technologies for terraforming and environmental management. It's fascinating." "Fascinating and essential," Dr. Martinez agreed. "These atmospheric processors are going to revolutionize how human colonies interact with alien environments. Instead of just surviving on other worlds, we'll be able to truly adapt them for long-term habitation." Sarah looked around the workshop, noting the sophisticated equipment and complex diagrams covering the walls. "This is amazing work." "It is," agreed. "And it's the kind of work that requires the best minds humanity has to produce, regardless of where they come from or what their background is." Sarah caught the subtle emphasis in his words and looked at him questioningly. "Dr. Martinez," said, "would you mind telling Sarah about the new colonial partnership program you mentioned yesterday?" Dr. Martinez's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. We're developing a new model for inter-colony cooperation. Instead of each settlement working in isolation, we're creating research partnerships that share resources and expertise across multiple worlds." "What kind of partnerships?" Sarah asked. "All kinds. Environmental management, agricultural development, cultural exchange, educational programs." Dr. Martinez gestured enthusiastically. "For example, Vanguard Colony has some of the most successful sustainable farming techniques in human space. New Geneva has advanced manufacturing and research capabilities. Instead of viewing each other as competition, we could share knowledge and resources." Stepped forward. "Dr. Martinez has proposed establishing a joint research station, a facility that would serve as a bridge between different colonial communities. Scientists and engineers from various colonies would work together on projects that benefit everyone." "It sounds wonderful in theory," Sarah said carefully. "But how would that work in practice? Different colonies have very different social systems." "That's where it gets interesting," Dr. Martinez replied. The research station would operate under its own governance structure, designed to accommodate people from different cultural backgrounds. Think of it as a neutral ground where the focus is entirely on the work rather than on social conformity. Sarah looked at, beginning to understand where this conversation was leading. And Vanguard Colony would participate in something like this. That's what I've been discussing with my father via subspace communication for the past 2 days, said. He's intrigued by the possibilities, especially if Vanguard Colony could be the location for the Agricultural Research Division. Your father agreed to host researchers from other colonies, including women in professional roles. Smiled, it took some convincing, but the potential benefits are significant enough that he's willing to consider flexibility in certain areas. Dr. Martinez excused herself, claiming she needed to check on another project, but Sarah suspected the woman was giving them privacy for a more personal conversation. Sarah said when they were alone, "What exactly are you proposing here?" "I'm proposing that you marry me," said simply, "but not as a traditional Vanguard Colony wife. As my partner in helping to establish this new research station, you'd be able to pursue your studies in while contributing to groundbreaking work in colonial cooperation." Sarah felt her heart racing. "And your family would accept this, your community?" "They'll have to," said firmly, "because the research station will be vital to Vanguard Colony's future, and because I'm going to be the one running it." "You?" His expression grew serious. "My father is getting older, and he's been looking for ways to prepare me for leadership roles. When I presented him with the research station proposal, he saw it as an opportunity for me to prove myself while also advancing the colony's interests." Sarah stared at him, trying to process everything he was telling her. "You're willing to change your entire society's expectations just for me." "Not just for you," corrected. "For us. For the future we could build together, and for the good of all the human colonies." He took her hands. "Sarah, I've spent my whole life believing that tradition and stability were more important than individual freedom, but meeting you made me realize that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty to your community is helping it evolve. And if I said no, if I decided this wasn't what I wanted?" Was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'd go back to Vanguard Colony and try to find a way to implement these changes anyway, because even if you don't want to be part of my life, you've already changed how I see the world." Sarah pulled her hands free and walked to the workshop's window, looking out at the bustling activity of New Geneva. "This is a beautiful dream. But what if your father changes his mind once you get home? What if your community rejects these new ideas? What if I get to Vanguard Colony and find out that nothing has really changed except the words people use to describe the restrictions?" "Then we'll build something new," said simply. "The research station doesn't have to be on Vanguard Colony. It could be anywhere. We could start our own settlement if necessary." "You'd be willing to leave everything you've ever known?" "For you, for the chance to build something better, yes." Sarah turned back to face him, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty, vulnerability, and a kind of desperate hope that made her chest tight. "I need to talk to my mother," Sarah said finally. An hour later, Sarah found in the colony's main laboratory, examining samples of native plant life under a high-powered microscope. Her mother looked up as Sarah entered, nodding her expression immediately. "That's the face you made when you were 7 and asked me if you could keep the stray cat you found," said. "What's happened?" Sarah told her about the research station proposal, about B's offer to change not just his expectations but potentially his entire way of life. Listened without interrupting, but her expression grew more troubled with each detail. "Sarah," said when she finished, "this young man is offering to overturn his entire society for you. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most terrifying." "Why terrifying?" "Because that's an enormous burden to place on a relationship. What happens if you're not happy? What happens if you two don't work out as a couple? He'll have sacrificed everything for nothing, and you'll carry the guilt of that for the rest of your life." Sarah hadn't considered that perspective, and it made her stomach clench with anxiety. "So you think I should say no?" "I think," said carefully, "that you need to be absolutely certain this is what you want. Not just the romantic idea of changing the world together, but the daily reality of building a life with someone you've known for 3 days. But isn't that true for any relationship? No one really knows what marriage will be like until they're in it." True, but most couples don't stake the future of entire civilizations on their compatibility. Set down her microscope and turned to face Sarah fully. Sweetheart, I've watched you your entire life. You're brave, you're idealistic, and you're capable of extraordinary things, but you're also 18 years old and you've never been in love before. How do you know I'm not in love now? Smiled sadly. Because love isn't the overwhelming certainty you're feeling right now. Love is what comes after that initial rush, when you know someone well enough to see their flaws and choose them anyway. What you're feeling is possibility, the intoxication of being wanted, of being essential to someone's grand vision. Sarah sat down heavily in the lab chair next to her mother. So what should I do? Whatever you think is right, replied. But think about it carefully, and ask yourself this. If wasn't offering you the chance to change the world, if he was just asking you to marry him and be his partner in an ordinary life, would you still want to say yes? That evening, Sarah stood on the observation deck of New Geneva's central spire, watching the stars emerge in 442b's violet sky. Tomorrow would board his ship and return to Vanguard Colony. In a few hours, she would have to give him an answer that would determine the course of both their lives. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find approaching. He looked nervous but determined, carrying a small package in his hands. I brought you something, he said, offering her the package. Inside, Sarah found a small device that looked like a combination communicator and data pad. What is it? A long-range subspace communicator, explained. If you decide to come with me, you can use it to stay in contact with your mother and anyone else you want to talk to. If you decide not to come, you can use it to stay in contact with me, assuming you want to. You're giving this to me whether I come with you or not. The research station project is going to happen regardless of your decision, said. Your mother's expertise in xenobiology would be invaluable, and she'd be welcome to participate whether you're involved or not. Sarah stared at the device, understanding the deeper message. Wasn't just offering her a future, he was offering her family a place in that future as well. She said slowly, Can I ask you something honestly? Of course. If I came with you and things didn't work out between us personally, what would happen to the research station? To all these grand plans for social change? Was quiet for a long time. I'd like to say that the project would continue regardless, he said finally. But honestly, I don't know. My commitment to these changes started with wanting to build a life with you. Without that motivation, I might not have the strength to fight for them. Sarah felt a strange mixture of gratitude and disappointment at his honesty. So everything really does depend on us working out as a couple. Maybe once the changes start, they'll take on a life of their own. Moved to stand beside her at the railing. Sarah, I know this is crazy. I know I'm asking you to take an enormous leap of faith, but I also know that some opportunities only come once in a lifetime. And what if I'm not ready for this kind of opportunity? What if I need more time to figure out who I am before I decide who I want to become? Then you should take that time, said simply, and I'll wait. For how long? For as long as it takes. Sarah looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his expression, and felt something settle in her chest. Not the overwhelming certainty she'd been feeling, but something quieter and more sustainable. Respect, affection, and the beginning of genuine trust. She said, I can't marry you, not now, not like this. She saw the disappointment flash across his face, but he nodded respectfully. I understand. But, Sarah continued, I would like to visit Vanguard Colony as your friend and as a potential research partner. I want to see your world, meet your family, and understand what we'd really be working with if we tried to implement these changes. His expression shifted to cautious hope. A trial period. A getting to know each other period, Sarah corrected, with no commitments and no expectations beyond mutual respect and honest communication. Your mother would come too. If she's willing, I think she'd be fascinated by the xenobiology research opportunities. Smiled, the first genuine, uncomplicated smile Sarah had seen from him since they'd met. I think my father is going to find you very interesting. I hope so, because if we're going to change the world, I'm going to need him on my side. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the alien constellations wheel overhead. Sarah felt a sense of rightness about her decision, not the overwhelming certainty that had characterized her earlier feelings, but something steadier and more grounded. She said eventually, Yes, Ask me again in 6 months. If you still want to, and if I've figured out who I want to become, ask me again. Took her hand, not possessively but companionably. I will. As 442B's twin moons rose over New Geneva, Sarah looked toward a future that was suddenly full of possibilities she'd never imagined. She didn't know what life on Vanguard Colony would be like, or whether she and would ultimately build something lasting together. But she knew she was ready to find out. The next morning, as ship prepared for departure, stood with Sarah on the landing pad, holding travel documents and research permits. "Are you sure about this?" asked one last time. "No," Sarah replied honestly, "but I'm sure I need to try." As they boarded the transport that would take them to a new world and an uncertain future, Sarah thought about the light catcher flowers had given her. Beautiful, functional, but only when they were free to capture and release light in their own unique way. Maybe that was what love really was. Not two people conforming to predetermined roles, but two individuals finding ways to complement each other while remaining true to their own natures. Sarah was ready to find out.